Hello and welcome to the Eastern Front. My name is Yulia Joja. I'm with the Middle East Institute, Georgetown and George Washington Universities, and I'm joined by
Giselle Donnelly. I work at the American Enterprise Institute and
Dalibor Rohac, also a senior fellow with AEI.
On our podcast, we talk about the many challenges to European peace that tend to emerge along a line running from the Baltic to the Black Sea, the Eastern Front, and about why those matter to the United States. Today, we are thrilled to have joining us Dr. Christoph Heusgen, who is the chairman of the Munich Security Conference and who previously served as German ambassador to the United Nations and as former Chancellor Angela Merkel's foreign and security policy advisor. If you enjoy this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us. Dr. Heusgen, it's great to have you with us. And maybe we can start on a broad level with the German Zeitenwende. Here on this podcast, just like everywhere else in the transatlantic space, we've been debating it constantly ever since Chancellor Scholz's speech 3 days after the full-scale invasion. And at the last Munich Security Conference, this was obviously also a major topic. And Germany has been getting a lot of heat, especially is getting it here in Washington for not following up on the implementations as much as particularly Washington would like. And yet it's called Zeitenwende for a reason. And what usually Germans are telling us is that Zeitenwende takes time. So we would like to hear your take on 1 year plus into the Scholz speech. Where do you think things lie right now? Where is Germany in its Zeitenwende?
First of all, let me thank you for having the opportunity to join you in this podcast. It's really a pleasure to discuss with you. And let's discuss Zeitenwende. The first thing is that I have the impression gradually that Zeitenwende, the expression as such, gradually entering the English language. We are not yet where kindergarten is, but to talk seriously, the glass is half full and half empty. Let me talk about the half full first. There is a radical change in the perception of Russia in Germany. There is a change in many aspects of German foreign policy. We are delivering for the first time or the second time in a serious way, Germany is delivering weapons into a conflict area. It was always a rule in Germany that with regard to arms exports, we had a very restrictive policy, and the general rule was not to send German arms into a conflict where they would be used. And now to have German weapons, in particular the Leopard tank, being used in a war between Ukraine and Russia, this is something that is for many Germans still hard to digest, and it's a change in policy. Also, on another level, energy. We have 180 degrees change our energy policy. Now, for years and decades, it was always delivery of energy from the east, from Russia, was something that was taken for granted. It was seen for many years also as part of Ostpolitik, as part of getting to overcome the cleavages in Europe, to overcome the Iron Curtain, and to do trade and have through trade get change in policy. That was a constant, and that led to a part, at least, also to German reunification. Now, to have a total ban on imports, to have tough sanctions against Russia is something that has total change in policy. Also, our attitude towards Russia, there were lots of skeptics in Germany and lots of people since at the latest 2014 who said, well, we have to change tack. But we had a large part of the population, a bit cross-party, elderly people who said, well, first, remember, Germany is responsible for 20 million dead on the territory that once was the Soviet Union. It was only thanks to Russia, to President Gorbachev, that German reunification was possible. So there is also for many years, there was this feeling of guilt, the feeling of gratitude towards Russia that led to a Russia policy that was criticized for many years as too lenient. And all this has changed, but it takes, as you said, I think Julia, you said this a bit earlier, it takes some time to have this really enter into or to exchange the DNA of many politicians who said we have to work with Russia, we have to see that Russia is a partner, we have to negotiate with Russia, and for them to understand that this is no longer possible. This takes time. We at the Munich Security Conference see this as a challenge, and therefore what we are doing now in Germany is what we call Zeitenwende on tour. We go with our Munich Security Conference through all German states, to all major cities, do town halls with local media to try to talk to normal people. We go into high schools, universities to tell them about what Zeitenwende means, that no, we can forget about working at this stage cooperatively with Russia. We have to continue to send arms to Ukraine, because if we don't do that, Russia will close in on you and all this. So the glass is half full, as I described, is half empty, because to change this attitude, to really put enough money into the defense budget, to have our defense system produce weapons, ammunition at the speed that is needed right now. This all takes time. We are now, I think, behind the US, the second largest donor of weapons to Ukraine. But for my taste, it took too long until the decision was taken to send all the different heavy weapons, to send the Leopard tank. But in the end, we did. So this is, I could go on, but this is, I think, the gist of the challenge that we have in front of us. But as I said, the glass is at least half full.
If I could just follow up on that quickly, when you go around the country and talk to people about Zeitenwende and what needs to be done, I wonder what sort of reactions you are getting, because clearly in some domains the adjustment, the change has been easier than in others. I mean, in energy policy, for example, the sort of shift away from Russian sources within the scope of months, I think, has been a sort of extraordinary change, which I suppose most Germans are, quite comfortable with and accepting of. But putting a greater emphasis on hard power, on military spending, on sort of rearming Germany, on bringing the defense industrial complex to a shape that would be needed in a situation in which Europe really needs to sort of do more, might be much harder culturally. So what are the sort of arguments you encounter in these conversations, and how do you respond to them?
May I add a quick footnote? That was the question I wondered about. Are there differences by region that are obvious? I mean, you guys have been at it for a couple months now.
No, thank you for this question. On energy, yes, Dalibor, we didn't have this shortage of energy that was expected, but we do have an increase in price. When you look at where you live in the US, when you look at the gas price there, energy, heat price, you probably consider it high, but it's nothing compared to Germany. So, and some of the European countries. So there is an increase in energy price, which hurts, but it is much less than what some people thought would happen. Lisa, I'm very grateful for your question, because it is totally different. To start with our last Zeitenwende on tour, we went to a city which in the US. This is Wittenberg, which is where Martin Luther put his thesis there on the door, where I was last week looking at the door. I had to find out that it burned down, so that the door is not the original one, but the theses are still there. So Wittenberg is in the middle of eastern part of Germany. And one would expect that this part of Germany, which was occupied by the Soviets until reunification, would be the one who would be very strong in supporting Ukraine. It's quite the opposite. It's in the west of Germany where people understand. It's in the east where we have the strongest opposition. This has many reasons. One reason is that people who live in that region and who have stayed in this region, actually it's to a certain degree depopulated, because many after the fall of the Iron Curtain went to the west of the country. Those who live there, many see themselves as losers of globalization. They see after the fall of the Soviet Union, when all the big state companies went bankrupt, many people lost their jobs, and they see themselves as actually losers of reunification. Also, in some areas, they remember that the tough people, that the people that they confronted every day was the East German communists, while it was the Russians with Gorbachev who then finished the East German regime. So to some of them, the Russians are even being seen as having brought something positive to them in the end. So in this debate, we had a lot about, well, you guys bringing NATO towards the east. You're to blame. A lot of criticism on U.S. behavior. The U.S. in East Germany is not that popular in some parts of the population because even 30 years after reunification, the indoctrination through the communist system in East Germany still is somehow still ingrained there. So you also have kind of a equidistant to Russia and the US. And we have a lot of refugees that came into this area which were not welcomed, and so you have a lot of convincing to do. There are the big refineries where Russian oil came from, also Russian gas landed in eastern Germany. Jobs got lost or are being lost. So there is some skepticism. Then in the rest of Germany, basically the support was very strong at the beginning. It remains strong. But still there, I see the obligation of reminding people again and again that the aggression of Russia continues. We cannot go back to the old normal. We have to continue to support Ukraine financially. We have to continue to welcome Ukrainians, which works well. Even alone in Berlin, we have about 100,000 Ukrainians who live here and have been accepted into families. So this works well, but still one has to remind people. And in particular, with regard to the budget, I see this is the biggest challenge also for Chancellor Scholz, because we definitely need more for defense. We have a special fund of 100 billion, but that will be soon gone with all the weaponry, where we have to catch up with what we haven't done in the past, like a new fighter plane that carries tactical nuclear weapons. All this, we need to have a structural change in our annual budget. We have to go from 1.5 to 2.0, and this is a lot of money. We have a new defense minister, Minister Pistorius, who is seen from the outside, very active, accepted by the armed forces. He loves the job. He is number one on the list of most popular politicians, but even he will.
And a big improvement on his predecessor, shall we say?
Yes, you see, everything is relative, but no, the guy also. I've met many defense ministers in my life. He is until now really on the top of the list, but even he will have problems in the present budget negotiation to get the 10 billion extra that he asked for, because people will say, well, we have to cover the social costs due to inflation and energy price. We have to invest more in green energy, and so there will be a lot of pressure. So there is some hesitation. It needs leadership. Scholz gave this fantastic speech, but sometimes one has the impression from the outside that he is a bit hesitant in following through, which has to do with his own party. The Social Democratic Party is the peace party. Basically, the Greens, who used to be that, are now much more pragmatic, and they're the party that is very forceful in supporting Ukraine. So it's the classic social democrats who have this, as we say in German, had lots of Russlandversteher, people who understand Russia, how we interpret them within them. And so Scholz has to be careful not to offend them too much. And so sometimes the impression is he could continue to provide this leadership which he provided in his famous Zeitenwende speech in Bundestag. Back to you.
We can stay within Europe for a bit. First of all, I'm still reeling from the shock for those of us who know German strategic culture well. The fact that the most popular politician is the German defense minister is unprecedented. So it sounds promising. If we are to zoom out a little bit, we've followed to the extent that we can from Washington the changing European security architecture. And we've seen the hiccups that are due to personality politics, but also due to the crisis between the French and the German, Franco German bilateral relationship, the locomotive of European affairs, at least perceived until recently. And we also observe a shift towards the East, which would make then the German Polish relationship one of the most, if not the most important bilateral relationship in Europe. And that, of course, has its own hiccups too. We hear that while politically there are a lot of issues, including requests for reparations, on the technical and sort of planning level, whether that's energy or military, things are going much better. There was a recent article to that extent in the Financial Times. So if you are to look at this kind of shift or reshuffling of European affairs broadly, how do you see this relationship developing? Is it that due to the war, due to also the future of how this region will develop, Ukraine after the war, possible discussions, we've seen that including in Germany, of EU membership for Ukraine. Do you perceive the shift going eastward and the Franco-German relationship fading to the benefit of the Franco-Polish relationship? How do you see these things?
Sorry, did you mean the Franco-Polish relationship?
Oh, sorry, the Franco-German versus the German-Polish, yes.
Yes, I think these are all very good observations. First, German-French relations. When you go back into history, between 1870 and 1945, there have been three wars. And what has been really a miracle in Europe, that after 1945 until today, this has been the longest period of peace in what the area, which the region which is today the European Union. This has to do with the German-French friendship and the readiness to integrate the economy, politics into the European Union, that now the fights that we have between each other are not fought on the battlefield, but at the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. And this is really a tremendous success that we have in Europe. But this European integration process, the whole European machine, when you look to the past, has only worked if Germany and France were together, from Adenauer and de Gaulle to Helmut Kohl and Mitterrand. And my boss, Angela Merkel, always took pain in working very hard with the four presidents she worked with. She was in her office from Jacques Chirac to Sarkozy to Hollande and Macron. It was not always easy, different characters, but this was in the she was told by Helmut Kohl from the very beginning that this is key. And so it always worked well. There is right now, I'm no longer in the inner circle, but looking at the outside, my impression is a bit as you described it, Julia, and that is that the German-French relations are there. They have their summits, they talk to each other, but it's not, it doesn't have the depth, the warmth, the intensity as it used to have. And this is something that is a bit worrying, in particular when you look at the French situation, where Macron has basically killed the political center, and one wonders, one wonders a lot, and is even concerned about who could be a potential successor to Macron. We don't want to look that far, but your observation is right, and this is something that one needs also from the outside to always push the governments to work together, Germany and France. The ideal would be this, what we call the Weimar Triangle. That is a format where you have Germany, France, and Poland together. We were fortunate to have them for the first time in a long time meet on the margins of the Munich Security Conference. So we had the three parties, president, prime ministers, together, but I couldn't get them to demonstrate that on stage because probably they were afraid of questions that may be embarrassing or would bring out the difference that there are. So there are some differences. The German-Polish relationship, let me start with the positive one. You know, I remember after reunification, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, there were lots of jokes in Germany about the Poles, and this has totally ceased when you look at the relationship in the between the populations. It's very good, has become very natural. The hero of my 10-year-old son is a Polish soccer striker, Robert Lewandowski, who won the Champions League with Bayern Munich and scored all records. So, and I live in the Berlin area. For, you know, people in the office here to go over the weekend to Poland and the other way around is very natural. This is very important. But there is now, of course, in Poland, the PiS government with Mr. Kaczynski, the strongman who actually campaigns with anti-German sentiments, with, you mentioned about the reparation. And this is not very, this is a bit alarming that you try to win elections with anti-German propaganda. The opposition, where still the former Prime Minister Tusk is in the lead there, this is much more normal. But and there's a good relationship. Tusk and Merkel were very good friends, and there is no. The mayor of Warsaw has been a guest at the Munich Security Conference, who almost won the last presidential election. So this is more normal, but we have to work at this. We have to see to it that we work together. On the main question, where does European Union shift? You know, European Union will never decide something where Germany and France are totally at odds. But German-French unity doesn't suffice today to get an agreement on other issues or on most of the issues. You do need now more the countries, the eastern countries, although there you have a lot of differences, and we must take into consideration the big challenge that Hungary poses, not only to Germany and the EU, but also to the East European countries. They used to be these so-called Visegrad countries, Slovakia, Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary, that were very close together and were kind of a powerhouse in the European. They have totally broken apart over Ukraine, so they are not as coherent as they were before. But you know, one has to admit, with the professionalization of the governments of the Baltic countries, Eastern countries are a stronger voice in the European Union that have been in the past. To get to agreements in the European Union is now more cumbersome. You have some still a bit pro-Russian, or let's say not a bit neutral countries in the south, from Greece to certain degrees, Cyprus, Malta. Italy, where everybody expected them to be close to Hungary, so far on foreign policy has proven all skeptics wrong, and Meloni is actually doing a good job. Spain, by the way, I'm surprised how tough the Socialist Party is. It has to do with the history that Soviet Union supported Franco and not the revolution at the time. So the socialists in Spain were actually the first one to offer their Leopard tanks. So it is, a bit more it cannot clearly divide east, west, north, south in the European Union. It's more complicated than that. But overall, with regard to sanctions, with regard to support, we pay now out of the European Peace Facility, we pay now billions to buy ammunition for the Ukrainians. So we are on a good track. We have our president of the European Commission, von der Leyen, who has been very outspoken, very strong on Ukraine, on the support for Ukraine. So overall, I think we are not in a bad place, but of course one always expects more.
Ambassador, your account of the differences between European countries, I think, would make a really good pitch for my most recent book, Governing the EU in an Age of Division, which addresses specifically this question of Europe's underlying heterogeneity and disagreements as a sort of basic condition of European life. But since you spent a lot of time talking about Poland, let me widen the aperture a little bit. So Józef Piłsudski, the interwar leader of Poland, was famous for saying that there can never be an independent Poland without an independent Ukraine. What this current war that Russia is waging against Ukraine raises as a question is, what kind of security settlement there will be once the war is over for Ukraine going forward that would prevent Russians from reinvading, or it would prevent future threats to Ukraine's independence and territorial integrity. And the most obvious answer to that question is NATO membership. So would you like to see Ukraine in NATO? And if not, what are the other alternatives that one could sort of consider to make sure that Ukraine will be safe once the war is over?
Yes, I think this is, of course, a very important question. I was advisor to the Chancellor back in 2008 when Chancellor Merkel, together with Sarkozy and others, vetoed Ukrainian membership in NATO. I still hold that this decision at the time was the right one, because Ukraine in 2008 was a totally different country from what it is today. It was a country totally divided. When the chancellor, to prepare the summit, went to Kiev, president at the time, Yushchenko, did everything to prevent that the chancellor saw his most important rival, his own prime minister, Yulia Tymoshenko. They were at odds. The polls in the country were rather negative with regard to NATO membership, and to have Ukraine enter NATO at that stage with the Russian fleet then actually stationed in Sevastopol on the territory of Ukraine, of a NATO country, we thought that was a bad idea. And I think still also when you talk to members of the Bush administration who fought for this then at the summit, you now read with Bill Burns, you hear from others that most of them were also against it. It was more Mr. Cheney who was in favor of this. But what was true then is not necessarily true today. We and the chancellor told Putin at the time that we had vetoed Georgian and Ukrainian membership at NATO. It was not in the books that this would change. There is a firm position on this, but Putin nevertheless used the argument of imminent kind of NATO membership in his propaganda, why he said he needed to invade Ukraine, etc. So this has changed then that he did invade, although he was told that Ukraine would not become NATO also. And this coming closer to your argument, we negotiated at the time in the so-called Normandy format, the Minsk agreements. The Minsk agreements, when you look at it, gave the possibility for a peaceful resolution of the conflict after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2014 and 15. But with the 22nd of February 2015, Putin has totally changed the game. And what held true in 2008, what I would say true until even 2015 and beyond, no longer does hold true, because there is not even the lowest degree of trust in Russia that Russia may finally adhere to an agreement. Nobody believes this anymore. After they have, dealt this death blow to Minsk, the death blow to the Budapest Memorandum, and therefore, if Ukraine enters some kind of ceasefire peace agreement with Russia, they will rightfully ask for, and we will probably push them to do that because we want the end of this suffering, the end of spending so much money. Ukraine rightly asked for guarantees. I'm personally now in favor of NATO membership because this is strongest support they can get, the strongest message also to Vladimir Putin or his successor that if he does it again, he will have to deal directly with NATO, with the US. My feeling, though, is after talking to officials in Washington, when I listen a bit what also here from the Chancellor's office is reflected, this will not. At this stage, I believe this will not get unanimous support in NATO. So the second best solution then is to put Ukraine full of weapons, to put as many weapons in the country as is possible, to make it very clear to Putin that if he tries again, or his successor, if he tries again, there will be a response that will basically destroy Russia. It is something like you remember the NATO double track. No, you're not. None of you is old enough then.
Yes, we're all old enough to remember that, or at least I am. Okay, I won't speak for the others.
It's a NATO double track decision where we said Helmut Schmidt was at the time the German chancellor, who said very clear, asked the Americans then to be ready to station Pershing 2 missiles on German territory as a countermeasure to their SS-20. And we won this deal, and Russia withdrew at the time, and this was the beginning of the end of Russia, I think. So my short response to your short question, I would prefer NATO membership. I don't think that we get everybody behind that, and so in the end, we will have to put Ukraine full of weapons with a clear message to Putin and his successor. This will be, deadly for your country if you try it again.
Well, I know we're running short of time. And I will refrain from pimping my own book. But first of all, I commend you for identifying the fact that Russia's position in Crimea is a real crippler to the prospect of integrating Ukraine into Western security architecture and particularly into NATO. But I wanted to try to pull the whole conversation together and to test a proposition with you. And that is that what we're seeing now is a real sort of historic shift in the orientation, the geographical orientation of European security matters. As you rightly pointed out, for 4 centuries, the cockpit of European warfare was space from the Belgian lowlands through the North German plain and in North Europe. And now it's really shifted to what we call the Eastern Front, the sort of the line of the Dnipro, if you will. And it runs more north-south than directly east-west. I think that accounts in part for not only the Franco-German relationship is less central to those questions, and not only the German-Polish relationship, but the future German-Ukrainian relationship and relationship with Central European countries becomes more critical to the European leg, if you will, of the transatlantic system. Do you think there's any logic to that? And if so, how would you parse German thinking about that? In some ways, that's a more traditional German orientation, or as traditional as any other. But, that's where the contest is. And it seems to me we have to respond to that strategic reality in some durable and long-lasting way. I know that's kind of bloviating, but, at 60,000 feet.
Right? Yeah. No, I would go to 100,000 feet. And
okay.
I would say that
Get the high ground.
Yeah, no, first of all, this German-French, whatever happens in France, whatever, I think that the European Union is there to stay. I think that this relation is so solid that we'll not return to where we were, as I said, between 1871 and 1945. Number two, what happens on the Eastern Front, so to speak, is right now in the limelight. But I believe from 100,000 feet, what is happening right now is the end of a independent, strong Russia. I don't think that Russia can sustain what they're doing for a long time. Their economy goes down the drain. We'll have fossil fuel importance will go down. Their demographics is a nightmare, and they'll become, as your countryman, for the Americans among you, John McCain has said, they'll become China's gas
China's
station.
gas station.
So in the 100,000 feet, it's more Europe, it's the US against China. But I think that this competition, and this now I come to my point, will be played out outside Europe, and this will be played out in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. This is the battleground of the future. And this is where we have to get ready to. And we have to, I think Europe and the US have to work together on this. We had at the Munich Security Conference, we had, I had representatives from the so-called Global South, which I don't want to call Global South because you cannot, they're all very different. But the Vice President of Colombia, Prime Minister of Namibia, Foreign Minister of Philippines, Foreign Minister of Brazil, for them, Ukraine comes number 5 or 6 on their list. They have totally different concerns, and they tell us that these are double standards. You are now insisting on supporting Ukraine. Where were you when the US was violating international law in 2003 in Iraq? And so you always concentrate on your problems. You have to look at our problems. And they become much more self-confident, and China has an advantage there because they have invested heavily with their Belt and Road. They look strategically at the ports. They look at the resources of these countries, and we are behind. We are not paying enough attention to this. We don't act together. We don't coordinate our instruments. And this is the biggest challenge we have. This is where Europe and the US can work together. But this is where I see the challenge, that we provide a better alternative to these countries than the Chinese do. And in doing this, we have to be much more sensitive to their challenges than we used to be. So that's, for me, the 100,000 feet issue. At some stage, we'll look back, I hope at least, at this confrontation as the last gasp of a country that, of a neo-colonialistic, the last colonialistic power that is Russia, and that is now pushed back into its place. So maybe I'm too optimistic with regard to Russia, but I see really the challenge in what I said.
From your lips.
Yes, absolutely.
That's exactly my thinking, from your lips to God's ears. And if that happens, we are optimistic too. Then we have a good excuse to finish up the Eastern Front podcast and focus on a different area. Thank you so much, Christoph Heusken, for joining us. We hope that you will join us again, maybe to talk about broader things at some point, if we're moving away from the Eastern Front at some point.
We are all available to moderate a panel at the conference.
No, we should host it. We should run the podcast from Munich next year. That would be we'll just grab people as they walk by.
No, but listen, thank you very much for this opportunity. Wonderful discussion, and great. I have to tell Dalibor that you are a bit at a disadvantage, because we put a lot of emphasis on having more women at the Munich Security Conference. But
Giselle has done her share.
Yeah. So no, let's stay in touch, and also with media-wise, we are ready also then when it comes closer to Munich Security Conference to see what can be done, that maybe can do a podcast or something. No, we'd love to partner with you, and I've seen Julia in another incarnation there some time ago. And again, thank you very much for the invitation. I found a very interesting conversation and very relevant questions, if I may say so. So all the best to you.
Certainly, also from us, very interesting, and we hope for our listeners as well. From me, Julia Joja, and my friend
Giselle Donnelly and
Dalibor Rohac.
Thank you for listening to the Eastern Front. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing us. To stay up to date with the Eastern Front, please give us a follow on Twitter at Eastern Front Pod in one word, and sign up for our newsletter through the link included in the show notes. You can find more episodes and additional content on our website, aei.org, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, and until next time, goodbye.